of machine learning. And we used to understand machine learning in the old models. We're familiar with them. We're comfortable with them. Think about like Westlaw and LexisNexis or e-discovery software. And how did those programs work? Well, they were reviewing a fixed universe and listing results, right? But generative AI combines that traditional AI and machine learning, and it trains on real world data to create new content. That's the big difference. It's creating new content. So how does it do that? It achieves this goal by using existing patterns and data and information, and we call this a large language model, an LLM, a large language model. So when the old tools just reviewed a universe of information and gave us a list, generative AI identifies patterns and makes new content, radically different. I think many of us are resistant to change. And you can identify as someone who's resistant to change or not. Sometimes change isn't always comfortable. But I want to say that as legal practitioners, we cannot avoid generative AI. And here are the reasons I think we can't avoid it. One, as lawyers, we have a duty of competence, and our duty of competence includes technological competence. So we can't avoid it just because it makes us uncomfortable. Our duty of being competent professionals means that we have to understand technology. And frankly, our profession is going to continue to grow with a digital generation of practitioners. New lawyers entering law school, new lawyers entering practice are coming into the profession against a background of using AI extensively in their life. So the fact that ChatGPT tells them how to write a letter to their abuelita to thank her for the Christmas present, that same student is coming with the same level of reliance on AI, and they're going to carry it into the legal profession just like they use it in their personal life. So they're going to come against a background of extensive AI use. I see it in my classes. I ask a question in class. Students are looking at ChatGPT or Clyde for an answer, right? So that's the same people. Those are the same people who are going to be our lawyers in the future. And also, I think generative AI has such tremendous potential to enhance our efficiency. It As lawyers, if we're using generative AI, that's going to save us time and let us focus on the stuff that we do really, really well, the stuff that's unique to human beings, right? Uh, the things that only we can provide our client, the higher value activities, our judgment, our empathy, our curiosity. So I think it's really, really exciting. But even with all the reasons we can't avoid AI, also, I think we should keep in mind the current and future impacts of legislation and court rules. I know recently the European Union passed an AI Act, and on the slide it says the draft I was looking at was December 2023. The final text was agreed to in February of 24. The EU is now at the forefront of regulatory compliance. They are leading the pack in regulatory compliance. And one of the things I think for all of us in Mexico, in the United States, in Canada, my home country, that is interesting about the EU Act is it has extraterritorial reach. Think about that for a second. Extraterritorial reach. Anyone doing business with a European Union market or using AI outputs within the EU needs to comply with the act regardless of their physical location. So all of our clients who are in businesses that have any connection, any market connection at all with the EU, will need to be in compliance. So what are some highlights from this act that came out last year? It has stringent requirements if we're talking about high-risk systems, including judicial process. So it has really strict rules for judicial processes. One of the things I found interesting about it was that any AI system that's using a chatbot, y'all have used chatbots, right? We've all used chatbots, I think. The system has to let the user know when they're interacting with a machine instead of a human being. That's a fascinating AI development. And if anyone is using a deep fake, which we'll talk about more later, that has to be clearly labeled. So the EU, a huge regulatory scheme and now binding on everyone. Also, we have local court rules and we have bar association and licensure disciplinary codes. All of that is going to impact us, and we'll look at that in a little more detail. So how does a large language learning model work? I asked ChatGPT, how do you work? Help me out here. And what we're talking about with generative AI is just a computer program that's trained to recognize and generate human-like text. So if on your phone, when you're sending a text, you get that autofill, think of this as like autofill or autocorrect on steroids with the speed of light, right? It's an autocomplete system. It's almost the perfect autocomplete system. It's an autocomplete system that has read an enormous portion of the internet and learned patterns in how all of us use language. So how does it learn? During training, the AI model is shown literally billions of sentences from articles, books, videos, podcasts, websites. And it learns by trying to guess the next word in a sentence, because all this is an autocorrect feature. So I have an example up here on the slide. If it sees the cat sat on the blank, from all the review it does, it's going to figure out Matt might be the most logical next word in that sentence. So over time, it adjusts billions of its internal settings so that it gets better and better at guessing the next word. And that's all it's doing. It's looking for a pattern. It's guessing the next word. So the model doesn't memorize the internet. It doesn't know stuff the way that all of us know something. It's just looking at patterns. It recognizes how words and ideas and styles tend to work together and appear together. And it's done it because it has reviewed literally billions and billions of samples. So I ascribe a lot of human characteristics to ChatGPT or my generative AI because it feels like I'm having a conversation with a machine, but it doesn't feel like a machine. So it feels like I'm having a conversation. How does it answer my question? When I ask it a question, it looks at all the words I've typed and predicts one word at a time in response. So it's always choosing the next most likely word given what's already come before, right? And because it's seen so many examples of how people write explanations or how they craft stories or how they even form legal arguments, the results that we get, what we read, sometimes, very often, feel like you're having a conversation. It feels surprisingly natural and coherent. One of our colleagues, of Professor Lumbach and I, sent us an email message one time about ChatGPT or generative AI. And I could just hear him. I could hear his voice in this email. And at the very last sentence, he said, "This was generated by AI. I asked it to write an email message in my voice, in my tone. It was the word choices he would use. It examined all of the data linked to his name and wrote something that sounded exactly, not close to exactly, a little more stiff, but pretty close to him. So once again, all the model is doing is looking for patterns. And because it's looking for patterns, rather than actually understanding something like a human being does, it can be wrong, but sound right. It can sound confident, it presents as correct, but it's just doing pattern recognition. It doesn't actually know what's true or what's false. It just knows what sounds likely, what sounds plausible, according to whatever data it was trained on. Okay, but it doesn't know the truth or not. You can even ask ChatGPT if it's correct, and it will tell you yes, but it doesn't know. It doesn't know correctness. So when we think about generative AI, I just put up on the screen some of the examples, like open source ChatGPT, Clyde, Lexis, the research platform. It has an AI. Westlaw now has AI component, Copilot. I don't know if you've done a Google search recently. I was looking at an article yesterday, and not a long article, it was about like 10 pages long that I'd written. I was trying to call it up, and my Google search said, well, this is very long. Would you like us to summarize this for you? So I was going to take my own work, summarize it, and give it back to me. I didn't ask for AI to intervene in this. It was just part of the whole Google platform. Image generators, if you, in one of my classes the other day, we asked for something with a Christmas theme, and it generated a whole series of images with a person doing something with a Christmas theme, um, and curated AI. So there are platforms that give you text, there are platforms that give you images, there's platforms that give you voice. How are legal practitioners using it? I think the answer here is in a lot of different ways. The first box, organizing and analyzing information in their legal practice. So here you might see it for document review, analyzing documents, billing, and some of those related automated tasks. I think the more interesting um, is the middle one, determining and predicting. There are several now AI platforms that give analytics for predicting what would a realistic settlement range for this case be? What is the case worth in terms of dollars or potential recovery? What is the likely resolution of this case if it goes to a jury? What's the best case strategy? How are jurors in Houston, Texas likely to respond to a defense that claims contributory negligence? Practitioners are using this in the same way that they used to use mock juries or shadow juries to preview their case and predict how a particular community is going to react to that case, which is kind of amazing. And then lastly, I think no surprise, AI is being used for drafting, legal research, but also drafting, creating exhibits, generating client communication. And for practitioners, frankly, using generative AI can be a major time saver, right? If I can take as a lawyer my client intake form, and from that form, AI can generate the original petition I file in court from that form, and I don't have to do that drafting, that's a huge time saver. It's also can be a huge cost saver. I don't have the money to have a mock jury or a shadow jury or a test jury every time I want to test drive a legal theory. but I can do it on AI. And it's also, frankly, available 24/7. And that's kind of freeing, and particularly for practitioners who have obligations that um, make doing research and case strategy at night the best fit for them. So I'm thinking people with taking care of young children on the one hand, older parents on the other. It provides a freedom and a flexibility for practitioners to change what their workday looks like. And that can be really huge as well. So it sounds like it's all good, yeah? But, nothing is ever all good, I suppose. There's always a snake in the Garden of Eden. So, what are some of the challenges? The big challenges come in these three buckets: hallucination, privacy, and then the content itself. And I want to look at each one of them and share some thoughts I have and hear from you what you think. Hallucinations refers to incorrect or false results or misleading results that the model generates. And the challenge, of course, with a hallucination is that false information, incorrect information is presented as though it were true, as though it were correct. And even if you ask the program if the information is false, it may deny that, even if specifically asked. So I think one of the early Google experiments was how to keep cheese from sliding off a slice of pizza. This was a pretty easy one, right? It's not like a legal question, but how do I keep my cheese from sliding off the pizza? And the Google answer was glue it. Well, of course not. Of course, we know that you're not going to put glue on food that's going to be consumed by people. And when asked if that was the right answer, if that was correct, if that's what should be done, the program said, yes, that's how you keep something from sliding, is you glue it. So that's the challenge with a hallucination. So what can we do as lawyers to counteract getting false or bad information? I think that some potential solutions, we need to um, do what's called plan the prompt. And the prompt is the question or the query that we ask AI. So we need to really plan what that prompt is. And then whatever results we get, translate that data into your insight as a lawyer. Bring your human judgment to it. Just like we all kind of laughed and knew you don't glue cheese onto pizza, bring your insight, bring what it is that you know. And then lastly, you have to review any source that they cite. The reporters are full of cases now where ChatGPT and some other platforms just made up case sites and case data, which is kind of frightening. And that takes us to the next slide. What have courts done in response? Well, sometimes they've given sanctions. They've fined lawyers. They're trying to require statements to acknowledge if ChatGPT or some other AI program has been used. And then some courts are just frankly barring the use of AI altogether. Although how you would know that someone used AI, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you would necessarily know. But let's look at some of the cases. Bloomberg report in June 2023 and a related article in the New York Times. This was the case that rocked the legal world, and it caused a ripple effect that's still going on to this day. The lawyer in that case cited court decisions that were just frankly made up by ChatGPT. They submitted 6 non-existent cases. So by that, I mean, they didn't cite cases that didn't stand for the proposition. They cited cases that weren't cases at all, totally non-existent cases. ChatGPT invented the cases. And how could it do that? Well, it takes a case name from one thing it read, it takes a case number from another thing it read, takes the name of a court from another thing it was trained on, it puts it all together and presents an answer. So, wow. I thought, well, maybe that's because they came from New York. But maybe it's just because it's New York lawyers. And I live in Texas. So were lawyers in Texas doing this? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So here's some Texas examples. It's not just New York. In federal court, the Goodyear Tire Company from November, that wasn't that long ago, right? November 2024. That was in the Eastern District of Texas. It cited to non-existent cases and it gave quotations from the cases. It gave actual language from the cases that didn't exist. The cases didn't exist. And of course, the language wasn't in the case that didn't exist. So what happened to the lawyer? The lawyer was fined $2,000 and required to take continuing legal education courses on generative AI. So they could be here with us tonight. That would have been part of their problem. The Texas case, the state case, was from the Dallas Court of Appeals just a couple of months ago in June. Once again, we got citations to 4 non-existent cases to support an argument in a case dealing with a fraudulent transfer. Here, the lawyer was fined $2,500 in attorney's fees, 8 hours of CLE in legal ethics and technology training. So it's happening, and these are just the ones that we've seen. So courts responding to this have taken, unfortunately, a very patchwork approach to addressing this issue. And I just want to show you how some courts in Texas have addressed it. If I'm in the federal courts in Texas, I would look either to standing orders or local rules of those federal courts. So some of the local rules I looked at here require a lawyer to submit a verification of the content. I've checked all the sites, I've checked all the citations, these cases say what I say. Others require that the lawyer put in the pleadings or in the brief a disclosure that they have used AI. So you see in italics on the left-hand side of the screen, this is what the federal court requires. A brief prepared using generative artificial intelligence must disclose this fact on the first page under the heading, quote, use of generative artificial intelligence. So the courts are requiring lawyers to actually make an acknowledgement if they've used it. What I haven't seen courts do, I've seen the verification. Yeah, I've checked all my sources. I've seen the use of AI, but I haven't seen anything where the courts require the lawyer to explain how they used AI. Like, what was your prompt? What did you ask? What platform were you using? I think that information would be more helpful were I making a regulation for the entire world. If I were boss of the world, that's what I'd want to know. What platform were you using? What did you ask it to do? Texas, we now have some specialized business courts, and in their local rule, they say it's not prohibited. Using AI is not prohibited, but whoever the filing lawyer is, they are independently responsible for the accuracy of their filings, and they have to comply with legal and ethical duties. So once again, that would be verification of the content. So that's how courts have addressed it. Let's look to see how some bar associations have addressed it. The ABA issued a formal opinion in July 2024. And it said that AI has to address attorney competence, confidentiality, and fees. So by competence, I think they mean that all of us as lawyers would verify the information that we're citing. The concern about confidentiality, because when you put client information into your prompt, you have given it to that platform and it will train future. It will start building the pattern on the information you've given. So you may disclose confidential client information. And then fees, which really kind of surprised me. I wasn't expecting that one at all. And that ethics opinion um, pretty much said you can't charge um, you can't charge an hourly rate as though you wrote it yourself if ChatGPT is writing it for you in 30 seconds. Right? You can't say, oh, it took me an hour to draft this. It's like, well, it took ChatGPT less than a minute. Um, so it was billing. In February of this year, the State Bar of Texas, my jurisdiction, issued an ethics opinion that also talks about lawyer competence, the confidentiality of data, but also verification and then fair billing. So verification is, I think, is the one difference between the Texas rule and the American Bar Association rule. Texas has also formed a task force for responsible AI in the law, and I think we can expect to see some reports from them before too long. And so I thought, because I'm sometimes kind of naive, I thought, well, this will solve the problem. Lawyers have to be competent in technology. We have to respect our clients' confidentiality. We have to verify that the information we're submitting is true. And we can't charge for work we didn't really do. Okay, I got all that. There shouldn't be a problem. And then I got to thinking, what about the fact that in civil law, in other words, not criminal law, it's not unusual for one party to be unrepresented. They don't have a lawyer at all. Where are they getting their information? They're getting their information from AI, from generative AI. They're filing their pleadings and answers from generative AI. And they're not bound by these ethics opinions or these formal opinions. They're not bound by duties of competence, confidentiality, and verification. I'm not saying that people who are self-represented are doing anything wrong by being self-represented, but they're in a new area and they are going to the sources they're familiar with. I don't mean to imply anything for anyone on this call. I will share for myself. I didn't feel well this week because of going to Kentucky. And so where did I ask? I asked Dr. Google, here are my symptoms. What's the answer? Right? And they're like, oh, you have blah, 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 whatever. I went to Dr. Google first, WebMD. A person who's not represented by a lawyer is going to do the same thing, right? They're going to go get their information about the law from Google or ChatGPT the same way that I went to Dr. Google, right? That's just human nature. We want to close our deficiencies in understanding. I think that that's going to be a challenge for courts. I really do. That's going to be a challenge for us as lawyers too. Another challenge for false information is something that's intentional. And here I'm talking about deep fakes. So I don't know if any of you've seen deep fake material or if you knew you were seeing deep fake material, but it's stuff that's not true, right? We can use generative AI to produce writings, audios, pictures, videos that create a false impression that aren't true. So there's a myriad of stories of uh, a more sophisticated twist on an old scam. The old scam used to be, I get an email from my grandson that says, help me out. Someone stole my wallet. I'm in New York. Someone stole my wallet. Send me $200, right? Have y'all ever seen those kind of scams or those emails? Yeah, that's kind of pretty familiar. And I think that we're used to now going, that's a scam. What deepfake allows is actually taking the voice of someone so that they get a voicemail that's it's going to sound like my grandson calling me. And he's going to use his voice, his word choices, and there are already reported instances of that. Um, what about made up evidence that's not really evidence? A made up video recording, doctored pictures. I don't know if anyone will ever trust a video ever again. I don't know if anyone will ever trust that this text message that's being introduced into evidence was really the text message. So because AI can create false evidence, clearly, if you use that at trial and you're a lawyer, that would be an ethical violation. If you used it in settlement conversations or discussions, that would be an ethical violation. But are we ready as a profession to address this? I think the rules of evidence would have to be changed regardless of where we're talking Texas or Mexico. Our view of expert testimony is going to change. It's going to have to be modified. What expert do I bring in to say, yes, this is really the videotape of Kathy Burnett on the 19th of November talking to colleagues in Monterrey? Right? Or is it just a deep fake? Am I really Katharina Lewinbach? How do we establish that? So I think that's going to be a real challenge for courts and for lawyers to establish the veracity of things. And sadly, perhaps we'll get to a place where no one believes anything is true, which I think would be a shame for the world. But that's a consequence of deep fakes. Another problem, of course, is privacy. Who owns the data? Once you upload your prompt to generative AI, what does that mean? Who owns this data? What are the challenges here? Well, as lawyers, we have a duty of confidentiality to our clients. Once you submit this data to the LLM program, the large language model, it owns the data. You don't own it anymore. So you might be having unauthorized disclosure of sensitive and maybe even privileged information, financial data, well, all the things that we protect with our clients. So as a lawyer, what do we need to understand before we use a generative AI tool in this space? We need to look at how the information we submit in a prompt is going to be used, if it's going to be shared by others, and where that information is going to be stored. And I don't think any of us ask ourselves those questions. Here's why I don't think we ask ourselves those questions. Once again, I'm going to go to my phone, this little computer I carry with me everywhere I go, that is my new best friend. And I want a new game or I want something. And it says, before I can go forward, I have to agree to terms of service, right? And there'll be 24 pages. And I scroll through those as fast as humanly possible so I can hurry up and click the I accept button so I can get the program on my phone that I want, right? We will bring that same cavalier attitude maybe to AI platforms. Oh, I accept, I accept, I accept. And partially I think we do that because we have no delayed gratification. But I also think we do that because we know we're not really in a position to bargain or negotiate our terms of service, right? What am I going to say to Google? I, Kathy Burnett, agree to all things except on page 27, paragraph 2. I'd like to renegotiate that. right? And then what they're gonna say is, "Thank you, Kathy Burnett. We don't need your $9.99 a month subscription." So what are some potential solutions? Because I do think the privacy issue can be a real problem. Well, first thing is carefully review the terms of service. Where's that data gonna live? Um, if it's possible, add a layer of protection by what you disclose, or disclose it in a way that's not so traceable back. I think informed discussion with our clients is huge. Talk about the risks. Before I do this, here are the risks. If they're willing to accept those risks, fine. But if we're talking about using AI, for example, to predict how a particular jury in the Southern District of Texas is going to respond to a contributory negligence claim based on the following facts, and I'm giving facts from an existing case, that's pretty detailed. That's pretty out there, right? Doesn't take much of a guess to know which case this was, which client that was. And then, if we're rich enough, we can develop an in-house program. So that's not going to be me, but it is some big firms. Some big firms are developing proprietary in-house AI programs. I think Sullivan Cromwell is one, for example. So what they have then is a closed universe. It's not an open source AI. It is only going to be accessible to lawyers at Cromwell. They can upload all of their files, all of their client intake sheets, all of their confidential information, and then ask the generative AI program to respond to a pleading, to draft questions for an interrogatory, whatever. But there's no risk that confidential information is being disclosed because it's all being kept in-house. But I think for most practitioners, that's not an option. Maybe it'll get cheaper, but most of us are using open source AI. What else do we need to worry about? Well, the content, um, what the program generates. We've already talked about hallucinations and non-existent sources, but also I think the program has the potential to express bias, not because the machine has bias, because the machine isn't a person. All it is doing is predicting patterns of words, but it's going to make a difference what it was trained on. Always going to make a difference what it was trained on. So once again, what are the solutions? Plan the prompt. Translate the results. Transform the information you get into legal reasoning, legal opinion. Bring your lawyering brain to work. Review all the cited sources to make sure they say what they really are claiming to say. And consider the potential for implicit bias and assumptions. My suggestion would be the most stringent, this last one. Only work with artificial intelligence that shows its sources. I want to know what it learned on. What are its sources? What's it pulling from? Human judgment matters. And I think this quote from the State Bar of Michigan is really important. All an algorithm can do is, based on the patterns that it's learned, weigh factors that the law or society might think are inappropriate, or to give the wrong weight to factors. AI doesn't and cannot understand the world the way that we do, and its results may reflect an ignorance of norm or case law precedent. It's not a human being. It's just doing pattern recognition. What word comes logically next in the sentence? But because it can do that, because it can generate a whole page of text in 30 seconds, it seems wise. But it's not. It's just pattern recognition. It's just put glue on your pizza. So going back to where we started, we can't avoid it. We need to embrace it. We have to be competent about it. It's coming because of the new generation of practitioners. It'll make our jobs better and easier. It will make us provide better service to our clients. And we haven't seen the end of legislation in each country, in each jurisdiction. There's some great resources out there, and that's what I'd like to close on. The American Bar Association, and here's the site, has a commission for the Center of Innovation, and it has a task force on artificial intelligence, free to download. The mission of this task force is to address the impact of AI on the legal profession and the practice of law and related ethical implications, and to provide insights on how to develop and use AI that is trustworthy and responsible. And lastly, to identify some of the risks with AI. This is great. It's free. It's downloadable. The next thing I would recommend is they have a task force report that came out last August. It's about, I don't know, well, it actually came out in January. It's about maybe 170, 80 pages long, but it addresses different parts or challenges to AI. Once again, free to download, free to search. If we have professional lawyer groups that are doing the research and identifying the challenges and risks, and it's free for us, I think we should take advantage of it. And I'm really honored and pleased to have been here today. And that's what I got.
Thank you so much, Professor. I believe I speak for everyone when I say that this was incredibly insightful and interesting. If anyone has questions, you're free to send them over to the chat or raise your hands in the Zoom in order to give you the floor to ask your questions. I do have already one question in the chat, so let's get the ball rolling in a way with this one, which states, legal reasoning is never fully neutral. It is shaped by underlying ideological assumptions about justice, rights, and social order. As AI tools become part of legal practice, they may mirror or amplify these ideological patterns in ways that are subtle and opaque. This raises a crucial question. If AI systems can develop or reflect an ideology, how might this shape or distort legal reasoning?
Oh, that's such a superb question. And it reminds me back of the State Bar of Michigan, right? Whatever program the model is trained on, it takes those biases. They can be gender biases, they can be religious biases, bias for a preference of one kind of political order as versus another, economic fallacies, and that's going to get incorporated into it. So how do we protect against it? I think the same way we protect against, or we try to protect against, bias in all the rest of our lives, is being vigilant and calling it out when we see it, and not inadvertently promulgating it because we haven't checked our sources. But yeah, it's a challenge in the same way that the bias inherent in any case precedent is a challenge, right? That's going to be the bias and assumptions of the judges who wrote the opinion. And then we say, oh, we're going to rely on this opinion going forward. We're going to perpetuate that bias or that challenge. Or the same way a legislature or federation has crafted a law that's going to be based on the perception and belief and priorities of those lawmakers. And then we will carry that forward. So I think we always have to dive deep and look at what's behind.
I have another question in my messages. Professor, do you think AI undermines the adversarial system itself? If people are using the same systems then are we really arguing and debating, or are we just having the bots fight our fights?
I love that question. I think that's great. I actually even heard a variation on this theme. It had two major companies in a supply chain, and they had two chatbots talking to each other, drafting the terms of a extension to a contract in the supply chain. And then the answer was, can we rely on, or the question was, can we rely on contract law for this? Because do you even have an offer and acceptance? And how can you have an offer and acceptance between two chatbots? There's like not even a person involved, not even human judgment involved. These are just automated programs. Oh my gosh, what happens next? So yeah, it might be a big challenge to the adversarial system. Here's what I'd say though in response, at least in my jurisdiction. 98% of cases, 97% of cases are settled. They're reached agreement, they're mediated, they're negotiated. So sometimes I wonder how adversarial our system really is. I think maybe we have a whole lot more compromise than we have adversarial. But just think
So,
about those two chat box working out a contract term on a supply chain. I love it.
so for the next question, I feel like I have to give a little bit of background because some of our students earlier on were in another talk that involved a little bit of AI. And in that discussion or that talk, they were talking about how AI could be a third type of legal person. So they were saying like how companies are a legal person, how humans are a legal person, the concept of AI as a legal person. So this question is asking on whether you believe that regulation will eventually go in the sense of regulating over the identities and giving responsibility to the systems themselves, or if you believe responsibility will still be a human element in legal matters.
Isabella, I hope that the answer is number two, that it will still be the responsibility of human beings and human elements. Professor Lumbach and I have a colleague who is writing in this area in the corporation space, and who has the responsibility for false information. In corporate law, we frequently now say a corporation is a person or can act like a person, right? In the United States, we say can make campaign contributions and it has particular duties. So I imagine we could take that same approach to AI, but which AI? Clyde, ChatGPT, Microsoft Bing. Will each one of those AI platforms be a separate person, a separate corporation? I don't know. Uh, and with the two chatbots negotiating the contract, um, can you even sue for specific performance for a contractual term that was created by two machines, two AI platforms? So I think in that case, courts might say yes. Human being delegated that authority to the chatbot to make that modification to the contract, and thereby they adopted it. So that's become their proxy. I think that could conceivably be a result in much the same way we've done corporate law.
That's a very interesting way of saying it. Then another question is talking about AI outputs as statistics derived rather than normatively reasoned. How should courts treat arguments that were produced through probabilistic pattern instead of doctrinal logic?
I'm not sure the courts will ever know. I'm not sure the courts will ever know how it was created. Right? You're not just going to be relying on probability. Um, you're going to have tied that to something in some kind of narrative. Uh, and the courts, I think, can't distinguish when that's AI generated and when it's person generated. I heard a justice from a high court in a state say, I can tell when I see a brief that's been AI drafted, and I don't think you can. I really don't think you can. I, I think we like to think we can, but No, I don't think so much.
Um, okay. In your view, is technological competence enough or sufficient, or do we need to articulate a duty of vigilance in the lawyer's obligation to understand both the uses and cognitive limits of algorithmic tools?
Option two. I think competence means we have to understand how it works, what the risks are, and what the limits are. Um, and it's not enough for us as lawyers to say, in terms of competence, I don't use it, so therefore I don't need to understand it. I think our duty of competence means we have to understand it because the other party may be using it. Um, yeah, it's it's how it works. I think law schools and training programs are gonna have to strategically and deliberately include AI training as part of the pathway to the profession.
I believe this next question was partially answered in one of the previous answers to the questions. But what risks do you foresee in delegating frames of legal issues to AI?
Mm. It doesn't have empathy. AI doesn't have empathy. AI doesn't have curiosity. All AI can do is predict patterns of word choices. What word is likely to follow the next word in a sequence? It sounds natural, it sounds coherent, it sounds like it's making a legal argument, but it is just pattern recognition terms. So the the downside I see is the total lack of empathy because it's not a human being. It's a autocorrect on steroids. It's an autofill on steroids. It's not a person. And so to me, the biggest risk is the lack of human judgment, the lack of human empathy. But I heard a speech about 2 weeks ago. I was working with some hospital groups and they brought in this big AI speaker. And he said, actually, that AI is learning empathy. I was like, no, how can you have empathy? Empathy is a human trait, right? How can a machine have this human trait, this large learning model? And well, we gave it a lot of data that showed empathetic responses. So now it can mirror an empathetic response. So that kind of shot my argument out of the water because I was thinking about this presentation. What AI can't do, it doesn't have curiosity. It can't ask what if. And it doesn't really have the insights that we have. But it's kind of scary to think it can mirror empathy. And it grows so fast. AI now is nothing like it was 5 years ago. In 2 years from now, it's going to be nothing like it is right now. So that kind of goes back to that competency question too. How do we stay competent when the field is changing so much?
Okay. The next question, more than AI, it relates to governance or regulations. It asks, when talking about the European Union AI Act, which exerts extraterritorial reach, how should countries or foreign practitioners, such as the ones in the US or in Mexico, respond when compliance obligations are set by foreign regulators?
I think the answer is when you're doing business in any EU country or you have any input in an EU country, you're going to have to comply with their regulations, and they are stout. Um, I can't recall for one, I'm just going to pull it up really fast. For one of the violations, it was like penalties and enforcement. For high-risk systems, fines could reach 3% of global turnover or 15 million euros. So my recommendation, if you're doing any business with an EU country, that's a huge price tag to pay. That's just like the fines, right? Um, and particularly if you have any employees that do business with the EU. Yeah, it's really huge. I mean, that's like a percentage of your net revenue. That's the kind of thing that will get a lawyer's attention and a CEO's attention.
This is the last question that I have in my chat. If anyone has any more additional questions that you would like to do, please send me a message or raise your hands to give you the floor. But it asks, as you noted, there's a lot of self-represented people increasingly using and relying on generative AI. How should courts handle the growing gap and discrepancies of inequality between represented parties who are able to afford lawyers and those who submit AI-generated arguments without constraint or without actual knowledge or access to technical knowledge?
There's always been a huge justice gap, I think, in every country between those who can afford legal representation and those who are going pro se who can't afford legal representation. And that gap, that justice gap, is huge. I think potentially AI could help close that gap and democratize access to legal information. Yeah, I do. Um, I know that's a real radical thought, but my self-represented client 5 years ago wouldn't have a clue. My self-represented client now can draft an answer or file a protective order in a family violence situation or answer interrogatories in a way that she couldn't have before. So maybe it will make that gap smaller. I don't know. I
Kayla,
mean, that's my wish.
Kayla, I see you have a raised hand.
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much for being here and exposing this presentation. It was really nice to see something different, I think. And my question, like my brain is sort of like all over the ideas, but my biggest concern in AI, it's that is basically making us useless, not in the way that eventually AI is going to take over our jobs, but in the way that we cannot even write a simple email anymore. Like people don't do that anymore. And I want to know what is like your opinion or your way of seeing how this is going to affect lawyers in the future. Like it starts with okay, we're gonna use AI to fill out this form, and maybe like judges are gonna do the sentences now. Like that is for me my biggest concern, and I want to know like how do you see that in the future?
I think the biggest challenge is, hold on one sec. No, thanks. Sorry, someone just came to the door. I think if we reframe this, Miss Leal, if we think of it this way, it's going to free us up and give us time to do the things we do best. I don't know that I need to spend 15 minutes trying to think of a way to write an email. If more quickly it could be done by ChatGPT in a way that conveys what I need it to convey, and I can spend my time thinking about case strategy and helping my client identify what are her interests, what are her underlying goals, all of that judgment that I can bring. So in a way, I like to think that it may give me more time to do the things that I'm uniquely qualified to do as a human being and free me from those kind of repetitive tasks. That said, I have never used AI to generate an email. I did use it, however, to make up 3 questions for my criminal procedure exam.
One more question came through the chat, which is in regards to junior lawyers in different professional spaces. The question is, what is the responsibility of employers of shaping newer generations of staff members and lawyers when they are delegating the functions that were traditionally set for them with AI?
Being 2 ways to think about it. One is many of the lawyers who are going to be the senior lawyers in the firms and are doing the delegation don't know AI from BC. Right? I mean, they are unfamiliar. And so the training may go in reverse. It used to be that the senior member is mentoring the junior member. It may be that frequently the more junior members of the firm are teaching the more senior members about AI and what AI can do and not do. And that's okay. Knowledge is knowledge wherever it comes from. But I think, as I said earlier, we have a whole generation of new practitioners who are coming to the law with a background familiar with digital AI. And they're meeting lawyers like me who don't have that background. So I think the younger professionals are going to have to educate those of us who are longer in the tooth and older about how it works. And then the delegation is going to be what it ever was. You can't offload your professional responsibility on someone else. Ultimately, each one of us stands alone ethically. And so, I mean, I can say I'm delegating it, but ultimately it's my professional responsibility.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. If there are not any more questions, I guess this is where we finish our conversation. I think I do speak for everyone when I say this has been incredibly interesting and insightful. Thank you very much for helping us understand not just how AI works, but in the context of the legal profession, how we are able to use it ethically and correctly. And really, from everyone at Facultad Libre de Derecho de Monterrey, we thank you for your time and your patience with the questions and this such an important and timely conversation in nowadays when technology is evolving at a rate faster than what we can assume to comprehend to a degree.
Thank you so very much for having me. It was a real honor to be here. And anytime you are in Houston, give me a shout out. Come by, let me see you in real time, in real life, and we can grab a cafe or do whatever it is we need to do to talk more about AI.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the team of Formación Profesional and FLDM Global for organizing these spaces. I'm pretty sure all the students and practitioners who connected will take something home to think about.
Thanks.